Well, this Lent, we are undertaking a series entitled Crying Out, bringing together psalms with texts from the Gospels to animate and narrate the ways in which, in our own lives and stories, and as a world and as a people, we are people who cry out. Where we cry out and say, Lord, how long? God, where are you? God, do you care? Do you hear me? Whatever the cry or cries of your own heart, we each have those echoing in our own souls and spirits, and they echo throughout the world. And as we journey this way of Lent, it's a yearly reminder for each of us that God journeys with us. So however you come this morning, may you know that there is a God who hears all of our cries. Today, in the midst of this series in Lent, we're taking up this text from Luke, where Jesus indeed, just like Lisa did, rolls open the scroll, reads the words from Isaiah. I was kind of waiting for you to drop it, Lisa, and then be like, it's fulfilled, and walk away. So in the vein of this story, I thought I would share with you a few of my favorite stories. Okay, and I'm going to do a really quick summary of a few of them, so then that way if you don't know them, you'll be good to go. Pride and Prejudice. Any Pride and Prejudice fans in the house? I heard that voice over there. So Pride and Prejudice, the wonderful tale with the ominous warning to never date or let alone marry an avoidantly attached man, right? That's the story of Pride and Prejudice. Or Harry Potter. Any Harry Potter folks in the house? Okay, a few more maybe. Harry Potter, the really great story about the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe, right? That's really a great one. I like that one a lot. Hunger Games, movie or book readers, anybody? Okay, I hear some of you. Hunger Games, the really wonderful, timeless tale about how oppressed people should just take it. That's the story of the Hunger Games, in case you missed it. Or Moby Dick. Moby Dick. Any other people forced to read that in high school and still don't understand what it's about? Just kidding. Well, that is the wonderful origin story of the Starbucks empire, in case you didn't know. That's a good one. Yeah, that's a great one. Or my personal lifelong favorite, The Little Engine That Could. Any little engine that could, chug, chug, puff, puff, where the real story of that is how unless you are a brand new, big, shiny steam engine, you should just go home, right? Was I close? So for those of you who are like either really confused or not sure what's going on, they're all completely wrong, okay? Now, let me just, to make some of you feel better in case your anxiety is Pride and Prejudice, that's actually the tale about this whole family, and there's the sister, and then there's all these different things going on, and there's some pride, and there's some prejudice. We're not really sure they fall in love, blah, 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 blah. Harry Potter, as it turns out, I still haven't read it because I grew up in a household where we believed it was not a good book to read, so I'm sorry, I will eventually read it now that I'm done with my doctoral studies. Hunger Games, as it turns out, is actually the story about how there is an oppressive capital, and the people rebel against that, and eventually, spoiler alert, they overthrow them. Moby Dick, I still don't totally know what Moby Dick is about, but there is a really big whale. Little Engine That Could, that's Chug Chug Puff Puff. It's a little blue engine, and it's a girl engine, and she takes all of the dolls and toys and all the good things to the boys and girls on the other side of the mountain, even though she didn't know if she could. Now, why do I do this other than to just spend 5 minutes telling you about random stories? The reason I did this is because sometimes I think that when you read the Christians' lives and the way we live out our faith, sometimes it seems like we might have read a different story than the story that's on the pages of the Bible or the pages of the gospel. Because, it's really clear if you read the Bible, the point of Christianity is to make sure that you know that you are more righteous than anyone else and they're all going to hell. Right? That's the point. Oh, maybe not, right? So I just want to stop and pause for a second to say, what's the story of the gospel? How would you narrate it? What does it mean to follow Jesus? Is your life showing a good plot summary of what it means to be a follower of Jesus? Because even though following Jesus takes our whole lives, and we mess it up all the time, right? We're like not the perfect authors of anything, because that's God. But even though that's happening, the reality is that in some ways, following Jesus, although it's profoundly complex and takes our whole lives, it's actually also pretty simple, right? Love God, love your neighbor as yourself, or as Jesus does, rolls open the scroll a la Lisa and says, here's what Isaiah has to say to us, right? He says, the Spirit of our God is upon me because the Most High has anointed me to bring good news to those who are poor. God has sent me to proclaim liberty to those held captive, recovery of sight for those who are blind, and release to those who are in prison, to proclaim the year of God's favor. And rolling up the scroll in the original mic drop, he says, today, folks, it's fulfilled in your hearing. Okay. Is that the kind of story we're living? One where God's Spirit showing up looks like this kind of goodness for the poor and those who are captive, those who are in marginalized positions in society on account of things that they can't control. To proclaim release for those who are in prison. Are our lives telling the story? Is the church worldwide, are we telling this kind of story? Are we rolling up scrolls and saying, today, rolling up our sleeves, it's fulfilled. Today, we're going to fulfill it together. This really isn't that complex. I mean, it takes our whole life to work it out, right? And to live it out, it's a daily thing. But this is the call of the gospel. In a world itself that is crying out for us to be a people who, following after Jesus, seek together to live out the answer to those cries, as God shows up through our saying yes to this God who calls to us. Now, if you haven't read the whole of the Lucan passage, just a little bit more of a spoiler alert of what happens. Because what's happened right before the text is everyone is super excited Jesus is in town. They're like, yes, our hometown boy is back. Everyone's liking him. This is really great. We're super glad he's here. He stands up in the synagogue, unrolls the scroll, says yada yada from Isaiah, says it's fulfilled. And then they're all like, yes, we're so glad. We can't wait to do it. Except for that's not true. What actually happens is they say, don't we know this guy? And he spoke really eloquently, and by the way, he seems to have a little bit of an agenda here. What's he up to? And so what they actually do is they run him out to a hill, and they're going to literally kill him and throw him off the hill. So actually it didn't go so well for him that go around. But what I love is it says, but Jesus moved straight through the crowd and he walked away. So here's all these people who've been in the synagogue, and they're like, we know this guy. How dare he come in here? He needs to go, really go. And then the crowd opens up. And I wonder how that's also instructive for us to think about what it means sometimes to preach good news. That sometimes originally the hearing of good news doesn't sound like or feel like good news. And it might take some time to let ourselves actually be open and broken open in order for the good news to really permeate in. So let me drill this down to a human story with skin on, namely my own, because that's the one I know the best. Okay, so here's the deal. Sara in my mid-20s. You've heard this before, so I apologize. I had a habit of being attracted to really avoidantly attached, unhealthy men who treated me very poorly. I was the classic friend that all of the friends were like, what is wrong with her? Seriously, she's pretty decent human. And she keeps liking these guys. I'd find the one man in the room who was couldn't even be bothered to make eye contact with me. And I'd be like, that's the one. I'm going to go after that one, right? So I had started going to therapy, was doing some healing work. But I was aware that I was still attracted to the guy who was never going to like me, okay? And so, what did I do? I did not rely on my source of attraction within myself and be like, keep trusting that, Sara, because it's going to be different the 100th time. No, instead, what I did is I relied on my dearest friends and mentors in my life, people who I knew saw me and loved me, to help me to do discernment work. So that way, when I met Andy Garbers, who was like my embodiment of boyfriend good news, right? And he was so kind and so nice to me that I wanted to break up with him because I was sure he was a sociopath because he liked me. Okay. We're not going to get into all of that. But for me at that point, what was actually good news didn't feel like good news. It didn't sound like good news because part of my story was I believed that good news wasn't for me. That in fact, I was attracted to men like that because I believed I was unlovable. And so to actually be treated as a person worthy of love, to me, it felt like the most dangerous news in the planet. And it was only through time and more therapy and continuing to breathe and pray and work it out, and I'm looking at one of the humans who's responsible for me dating and marrying Andy Garbers, who would tell me to breathe and take a minute before breaking up with Andy Garbers. That's Greg Meeland over there. That I began to actually believe it was good news for me. And that happens sometimes. That we can say, oh, I totally want to follow Jesus. I believe in Jesus. Jesus loves me. But sometimes when we initially hear this word that says, hey, this love is for you, or that says, hey, the Spirit is on me and it's good news for the poor and the oppressed. Well, if you're not living in that space, it might not sound like good news at first. It might sound like the way history has always functioned, where it's just one group oppressing the other, and so I got to make sure to get mine. And Jesus shows up and upends everything and says, no, the kingdom of God and God's favor, it's for all of us. So let's tear down the things that are keeping us from being able to truly be free and to live and to know good news in our bones. And let's live good news for all of our neighbors, all of our friends, including us. Now, I care about this, not just because it's written in Luke, which is a good reason, and not just because I think the good news is something that should animate our lives as Christians. But I care about this because the way that we live our lives, how we understand what the plot line of being Christian is about, it impacts the way that we live. And I hope and pray we'll continue to let this good news saturate in so that we can be people who in our time and place live out this kind of news. Where every kid, whatever their gender, whatever their sexuality, can know that they are safe and loved because we believe that everyone is made in God's image. And that everyone is deserving to have life and breath and safety. Why? Because God made them. Leave all the rest up to God. Are we living out a story in our world in which we are showing ourselves to be people who are good news to those who are crying out? Many of you have seen the studies in recent years regarding the rise of religious nuns. Not N-U-N-S, for those of you who get confused by that sometimes, but N-O-N-E-S. Those are folks who are religiously unaffiliated. And in the latest study from the Pew Research Foundation, the two major reasons why people identify as religious nuns, one is because they say that religious institutions don't have space for them, their questions, or their doubts. We're a people who we know about science and psychology and different faiths and ways of being in a way that's unprecedented in human history. And so if we just say to one another, believe this or get out, right? A lot of people are like, well, then I guess I got to get out, right? The second reason that comes up the most is because of the ways in which religious traditions, and particularly in Christianity, which is the most dominant religion in the United States, how it has aligned itself with things of judgment and moral hypocrisy, and has been against people. I've seen these two things play out in the lives of my friends. Some of you have heard me say before that all of my friends I grew up at church, going to church with, not one of them goes to church now. And for most of them, it's not because they don't love Jesus. It's because in living out their faith and asking questions, they were shown the door. It's because they took the gospel seriously and they read things like this from Luke and they said, okay, come on, let's go do it, church. Let's care about these things the way Jesus is calling us to. And then they got labeled as something that was outside of church, that, hey, you're trying to be political, you're trying to do this thing, and they're like, I'm trying to follow Jesus. So how do we embody a story that's good news, not just for them, but good news for us too? Because I know a lot of your stories, and I know you have full and robust lives and questions and wonders and all sorts of things that you're carrying. So how can we embody to each other good news of this sort? For me, this is so much of what has been the deepest joy and honor of getting to work here as a pastor. Is getting to come alongside of you and your stories and what God's up to in your life. And to say, keep going, that there is more good news that is here for each of us. Now, sometimes that's also meant that being a pastor doesn't mean I just say, hey, keep dating the bad guys, right? Sometimes being a pastor also says, no, that's not actually good news for us. Like, let's lean in a little bit more. Sometimes it is that work of saying, because I believe God is love and because I love you, because we are all loved, lean in further. Do the work a little bit more. I know that this can be uncomfortable and painful, and trust me, I have been there too. But to be a pastor in this way is to say, hey, keep on going. Let's go together. Let's listen to this good news and seek to embody it in our lives and then in the world. Now, at times, perhaps, that's made me not everyone's favorite, but I know that you actually love me too. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm grateful for the honor that it has been to get to gather together every Sunday and wrestle with this God and this text, not just as intellectual exercise, but because we believe that our lives are at stake, that there is something that is worth giving our lives to that is here, and we're working at it out together. And so I pray that each of us in this Lenten season will take these words of Jesus even more seriously than we did yesterday. That call to repent, which means to turn, to believe, to begin to believe that good news will become such that we join with this Jesus. We take out the scrolls in all of the places of the world and we say, today we're going to fulfill it. Today this word is fulfilled. That the Spirit of God is here. That the Most High has anointed each of us to bring good news and to be good news to those who are poor, to proclaim liberty to those held captive, and recovery of sight for those who are blind, to release those in prison, and to proclaim that this is the year of God's favor. May God's work be fulfilled in each of us. And may you know this good news anew this Lenten season. Will you pray with me?